Hello, I'm the Shadow Critic, and in this episode we're talking about choosing life in the hardest circumstances. And in this episode I'm continuing in my 3-part abortion series that I'm making over the summer. Over the summer I've been talking about abortion in a 3-part series, and this is the second installment of that series. And in this episode we're going to be talking about choosing life even in extreme circumstances. So, choosing life even when the situation is very extreme or very hard. Choosing life in the worst circumstances. We're going to be talking about choosing life in these awful circumstances. Now, of course, the circumstances that come to everyone's mind, the two we're going to be talking about in this episode, are the most extreme situations in which you can choose life. The most extreme situations in which we're called to choose life are rape and the health of the mother being potentially harmed. So why should you choose life in a situation where someone's been raped, or in a situation where the life of the mother is at risk? How and why should we choose life? Let's start with rape. First of all, I want to say this. I think it goes without saying, but because we are talking about it, I'll say it anyway. Rape is a horrendous crime. It is absolutely evil. It is one of the most hateful things you can do to another person. It's inexcusable, and it is a plague in our society, and it needs to be removed from civilization forever. There is no excuse for rape. So I just wanted to acknowledge that truth, because I'm going to be talking about choosing life in spite of rape, and I don't want it to seem like I'm taking a flippant attitude towards this awful crime. I am going to be telling you to choose life in spite of rape, but I don't want it to seem like I'm treating rape with flippancy. It is an awful crime. However, rape does not justify abortion. And you may ask, why is that? And the answer is, we still have to ask the most important question. And this is the most important question of them all. The one that the life debate really comes down to. Are unborn children actually alive? And human. Are babies in the womb actually living and human? That is the question that everything really comes down to. Because if unborn children are alive and they are human, then it's never okay to murder them, regardless of the circumstances. Because it's wrong to take innocent life, and it can't be justified, even by something as evil as rape. And even though rape is evil, it doesn't give us the right to destroy innocent life. When we're alive and human, then we shouldn't abort them. So if children in the womb are alive and human, then we shouldn't abort them, even if someone has been raped. So the question is, are fetuses in the womb actually alive, and are they human? And the answer to that is obviously yes. So we should talk about what life actually means. What does it mean to be alive? Well, the definition of life is an organic organism that is growing. So when a biological organism is growing, it can be said to be alive. So if a biological organism is growing, it can be said to be alive. And obviously, fetuses grow. They change, they take in nutrition, and they use it as an energy source. So they are most certainly alive. You can't deny that. They're taking in nutrients, they're using it as energy to grow, they're obviously alive. And even pro-choicers know that a baby in the womb is alive. Because if it wasn't, they wouldn't need the abortion. So you just have to think about it for 5 seconds. They need the abortion, and the reason they need it is because the fetus is growing. Or in other words, it's alive. If it wasn't alive, they wouldn't need the abortion. So babies in the womb are undeniably alive. It's obvious to everyone. That can't really be denied. But pro-choicers would counter-argue that although they may be alive, they are not really human. Pro-choicers have all kinds of extremely individual, arbitrary rules about when a baby becomes a human, and when it should be protected by the law. So for example, some pro-choicers say unborn babies become human in the 3rd trimester. Some say it's at the moment of birth. Others say it's at the first moment of breath. And sadly, some extremists say you don't become fully human until you start forming permanent memories and a personality based on them. And this happens at around the age of 6. So yes, sadly, some extremist pro-choicers argue that toddlers are not really human and that their lives should not be protected by law. And once again, this is a very extreme view. So yes, there are some people who say that toddlers aren't really human beings because they don't have permanent memories and their personalities aren't fixed. Like I said, that's quite an extremist view, but it is one that exists. However, pro-choicers may counter-argue that fetuses may be alive, but they're not really human. Pro-choicers have all kinds of extremely individual, arbitrary rules about when a baby becomes human, and when they should be protected by law. For example, some pro-choicers say that unborn babies become human in the 3rd trimester. Some of them say that babies become human at the moment of birth, and others say it's at the moment the baby takes its first breath. And some extremists say you don't become fully human until you start forming permanent memories and a personality based on them. And this normally happens at around the age of 6. But some pro-choice extremists argue that toddlers are not really human and that they should not have their lives protected by law. This is a very extreme view, but some people hold to it. And you might get some pro-choicers who are like, no, that's just stupid, that's just made up, and nobody believes that toddlers aren't humans. I know it sounds made up, but it isn't. Some pro-choicers argue that you're not human unless you have experiences, memories, and relationships. They say that your humanity comes from your experiences, your memories, and your relationships. And they say since babies don't have any experiences, memories, or relationships, they aren't really human. And some of them say this is true for newborns, some of them say this is true for babies, and some who are very extreme in this view say that you're not fully human until you stop being a toddler. As I said, the people who argue this are largely academics. For the most part, this view is found in academic papers, dissertations, and books. It's mostly believed by pro-choice academics. And the reason for that is academics have to be logically consistent. So if they're going to argue that experiences, memories, and relationships are what make us human, and that you're not human before you form those things, then as an academic you have to be logically consistent. You can't say there's one standard for babies in the womb and another standard for everyone else, because people will call you out when they peer review your work. Normally atheists and pro-choicers can get away with lying and hypocrisy, because in the public there's no one to really call you out. But if you're going to release work, academically, it's going to be peer-reviewed, so they have to be logically consistent. So if they say that humanity comes from experiences, memories, and relationships, then they have to apply that across the board. And of course, newborns and babies don't have any experiences, memories, or relationships. And even toddlers have nearly zero experiences, almost no memories, and very limited relationships. So you can see how they arrived at this evil conclusion by saying that experiences, memories, and relationships make you human. But because babies in the womb and very young children lack those things, in the minds of those academics, that means they are not human. And if you're curious as to why this isn't a view in the mainstream, even though people do say in the mainstream experiences, memories, and relationships make you human, this is something you hear even from mainstream pro-choicers. Even if you were on the street asking pro-choicers what they believed, you would probably hear from a lot of them that experiences, memories, and relationships are what make you human. So you may be asking, why isn't the view that babies and toddlers aren't human more popular among mainstream pro-choicers? And that's because the average person has no logical consistency. They believe one thing and they never apply to anything else. And it's because the average person isn't being peer-reviewed. The average person can say whatever they want and they're not going to get called out. And it doesn't matter if their logic is inconsistent, because if it goes along with the mainstream view, nobody will question it. Support of abortion is unfortunately very popular in our secular world, so people are not afraid to be inconsistent when they support abortion because they know no one will call them out. So the average person doesn't use logical consistency, and that's why this view isn't more widely held, even though many pro-choicers accept the logic behind it. But I assure you I'm not lying, this is an actual thing. It's mostly academics who believe this, so like pro-choice academics. But the reason for that is because in academia, being logically consistent is very important, and a lot of pro-choicers don't really have good logic for when they believe life begins. They just pick arbitrary points, like at some undisclosed time in the third trimester. But that doesn't work in academia when your arguments come under a lot of criticism. And a lot of pro-choicers already believe that you don't become human until you start forming memories. But they don't take it to the logical conclusion of their argument. They don't take it to the point where they say babies that have just been born aren't human, because they don't need to be logically consistent in their views. But academics do. So if an academic believes that you don't become human until you start forming memories, then they have to be logically consistent in their view. And that's where you get rare examples of people who believe that toddlers aren't human and shouldn't be protected by law. Once again, it's rare, but people have argued it, shockingly enough. Pro-choicers as a group have a wide range of views about when life begins. Some people say the moment of birth, some people say the moment you take your first breath, others say when you start forming memories. And the only thing they have in common is that all of these opinions are totally arbitrary. Pro-choicers just pick a random point in the child's development that fits their purposes, and they say that's when life begins. But it's really just totally arbitrary and based on what they feel is right in that moment. So, for example, they might say something vague like the third trimester, and then if you ask them for more details, like exactly when in the third trimester, they'll say, oh, it varies from person to person, which is basically their way of not having to give an actual answer. They are totally inconsistent about when human life begins, and they constantly change their views. And the reason they do this is because they don't actually care when human life begins. In all honesty, they don't care at all about human life. If they need human life to begin in the third trimester, then it begins in the third trimester. And if they need human life to begin when a woman goes into labour, then it begins when she goes into labour. But if they need it to be at the first breath, then it's the first breath. It's all totally dependent on what they need at that moment for their argument to work. They don't really care about human life, obviously. They just say whatever they have to say to win the argument and to justify their evil actions. So when does a human life begin? Well, we know that fetuses in the womb are alive because they're growing. As we just said, if a biological organism is growing, it is alive. So we know that fetuses are alive because they're growing biological organisms. But are they human? And the answer to that is also yes. Babies in the womb are fully human from the moment of conception. At the moment of conception, a unique DNA code is formed. This DNA code is totally unique and distinct from both the mother's and the father's DNA. That's because it's the DNA code of their child. It contains half of the mother's DNA and half of the father's, and it combines this to create a completely new, distinct, and unique DNA code. At the moment of conception, this new DNA code is created. However, even as a single cell, an embryo contains all of the genetic information that the child will need throughout their life. It contains genetic information such as their hair color, eye color, and their skin color. And this DNA code does not change from the moment they are conceived as a single cell until their death. So basically, the moment a child is conceived, it contains all of their genetic information, such as their hair color, eye color, skin color, and so on. And this DNA code does not change from the moment they were conceived as a single cell until the point of their death, at the age of like 90 or something. Or at some other extremely old age. So your DNA stays the same from the moment you were conceived to your death as an adult. And this is why conception is the only logical time to say that human life begins. So fetuses in the womb have two human parents, and they have their own unique human DNA. So they are certainly human, because they have two human parents and their own unique human DNA, which makes them human. So yes, fetuses in the womb are both alive and human. Pro-choicers may counter-argue by asking, well, what about skin cells, sperm cells, and egg cells? They're alive, and they contain human DNA, but nobody says that it's wrong to kill them. And that's true. If you scratch your face, you destroy some of your skin cells. But we don't see destroying skin cells as immoral. Sperm cells and egg cells also contain human DNA, but it's not immoral to destroy them. So why is it okay for us to destroy our skin cells, or our sperm cells, or our egg cells, but it isn't okay to destroy a human fetus? They're both alive, and they both contain human DNA, so what's the difference? Well, the answer is that skin cells, egg cells, and sperm cells are not separate organisms. So once again, they are not separate organisms. When it comes to biology, how can we determine what is classified as a separate organism and what is not? We can determine what makes something a separate organism using a very simple test. This is sometimes called the net test, and this is how it's done. If you can give an organism the correct nutrition, the correct environment, and enough time, what will happen to it? Well, if we take a human fetus and we give it the correct nutrition, the correct environment, a mother's womb, and enough time, it has the potential to become a mature member of the human species. So a fetus is an immature member of the human species, but given sufficient nutrition, the correct environment, and enough time, it has the potential to become a mature member of the human species. So for example, if you take a skin cell, an egg cell, and a sperm cell, it doesn't matter what nutrition or environment or time you give them, they will never have the potential to become a mature member of the human species. So for example, if you took a skin cell and you put it in a woman's womb, nothing would happen. It would just eventually die. If you took an egg cell and put it inside a woman's womb without a sperm cell, nothing would happen, and the egg cell would eventually die. If you took a sperm cell without an egg cell and put it inside a woman's womb, nothing would happen, and the sperm cell would eventually die. A skin cell, a sperm cell, and an egg cell don't have the potential to become fully mature members of the human species. However, if you take an egg cell and a sperm cell and you combine them into an embryo, and they fertilize each other, and they become an embryo, and you put that into a woman's womb, then if you give it the correct nutrition and enough time, it has the potential to become a fully mature member of the human species. So unborn fetuses are alive and fully human members of our species. They are separate, distinct organisms. That is what separates them from things like skin cells, egg cells, and sperm cells. Unborn fetuses are separate, distinct organisms, because if you give them sufficient nutrition, the correct environment, and enough time, they have the potential to become a mature member of the human species. Whereas a skin cell, an egg cell, and a sperm cell cannot do that. So we can see that unborn fetuses are alive and fully human members of our species. And now that we have shown that unborn babies are human and alive, we can finally answer the question, why is abortion wrong in extreme cases such as rape? Well, since we have shown that babies in the womb are alive and fully human members of our species, it's really a question of whether it's wrong to murder a child who was conceived from rape. And the answer is, of course it's wrong. It's evil. Now, you may say that because the child was conceived by rape, it doesn't matter and they don't deserve the same rights everyone else has. But let's do a thought experiment. Imagine we had two children that were identical. Let's call them Child A and Child B. These children are exactly the same. Child A and B are identical. They're the same age, the same height, they have the same skin colour, the same eye colour, the same personality, the same hair colour, the same everything. They are the same child, except for one difference. One of them was conceived through rape, and one of them wasn't. And that is the only difference between them. Let's say that Child A was conceived consensually, and Child B was conceived non-consensually through rape. My question is this: does Child B have less worth as a human being because of how he was conceived? Does the nature in which he was conceived make him less human does it mean that he has less human dignity than child A? Does he have less human worth than child A? Does he have less human dignity and less humanity than child A, just because of how he was conceived? And does it mean that he has less of a right to life? Hopefully you said no. If you believe that child B has less humanity, less human dignity, and less right to live than child A, then you really just hate him because of how he was conceived. Now, hating someone based on how they were conceived is no different to racism or sexism. It really isn't. If you think about it, we don't get to choose how we were conceived. We don't get to choose our skin colour or our gender. So if you hate somebody because they were conceived by rape, it's really like hating someone because they're black or a woman. You're hating them based on something that they really had no say in. They didn't choose what race they were going to be, what gender they were going to be, or how they were conceived. So if you hate people because they were conceived by rape, and you see them as less human, you say they have less human dignity, and you say that they have less of a right to life because of how they were conceived, you're really no different to a racist saying that a black person has less human dignity or less of a right to life and is less human because of their skin colour. Both of these things were elements that the person in question did not choose about themselves. They didn't choose their race, and they didn't choose how they were conceived. Furthermore, there are many adults who were conceived by rape. So, there are adults walking around the world right now who were conceived by rape. And, you have to ask, are they less human? Do they have less human dignity? Do they have less of a right to life than the rest of us? And I would say no. I would say that regardless of how they were conceived, they are human, they have the same amount of human dignity and the same right to life as the rest of us. So some people ask, well, why not just ban abortions for women who had consensual sex, but for people who are raped, why not just have that as the one exception? But what kind of message is that sending out? Well, the message we would be sending is that people who were born of rape are somehow less human and don't deserve a right to life. If we say that all abortion should be banned except for rape, the message we're sending is that people who are conceived in rape are somehow less human and deserve less of a right to life than the rest of us. If we say that all abortion should be banned except for rape, then we're really saying that people who are conceived in rape are less human than we are, have less human dignity than we have, and have less of a right to life than we do. People who are conceived in rape probably already feel immense guilt for something that was not even their fault. The rape happened before they were even born, and yet they probably feel immense guilt over it. In all probability, it's extremely likely that if someone has the knowledge they were conceived in rape, it would cause them extreme guilt, and they may even be so distraught over it that they may have considered taking their own life. They may have questioned whether they had the right to live, whether they deserved to exist, or whether it would have been better if they had never existed at all. It's extremely likely that they have asked these questions themselves. And if we ban all abortion except abortion for rape, then we are really just confirming all of their fears. Because we're saying that everyone has the right to life, unless you're conceived by rape, in which case you just don't matter. If we say that we're going to defend all life except theirs, then what does that tell them? What message are we giving them? Well, we're telling them that they just don't matter, that their lives aren't important, that they don't count as real people, that they don't have human dignity, they don't have worth, they don't deserve to live, and it's all because of how they were conceived, something they had no control over. And this is why I say that it's like racism or sexism. They didn't have any control over whether they were conceived through rape or not, so hating them because of that is like hating someone because they're black. People who are conceived from rape are not monsters. They are not evil by association, and they have just as much humanity, human dignity, and the same right to life that we do. It's like I said, imagine two children, child A and child B, and they're completely the same. The same age, the same height, the same skin colour, the same eye colour, the same hair colour, the same personality, the same everything. They are the same child, except for one thing. One of them was conceived via rape, and one was not. Let's say child A was conceived consensually, and child B was conceived non-consensually through rape. Is child B less human than child A? Does he have less human dignity? Does he have less human worth? Does he have less of a right to life just because of how he was conceived? Does that make him less human? No. Child A and child B have the same humanity, the same human nature, the same human worth, and the same right to life. And if you doubt me, then what if I told you that I'd lied, and that all along child A was the one that was conceived via rape, and child B was the one that was conceived consensually? So child B, the one that you may have thought didn't have a right to life because of how he was conceived, he was the one that was actually conceived consensually. Whereas child A, the one you thought deserved to live, was the one conceived by rape. And this just goes to show you that the notion we have that children of rape don't deserve to live, or they don't deserve to exist, or they're not human, or they don't have human dignity or human worth, that notion is completely fictional. Because as you just saw, unless I told you whether child A or child B was conceived via rape, you would have no idea. You wouldn't be able to tell which one was which just by looking. So they're the exact same. You couldn't tell them apart just by looking. I would have to tell you, which shows that they are the exact same. They have the same humanity, the same human dignity, the same worth, and the same right to life. So that was a pretty sneaky trick, but I did it to show you how arbitrary all of this is. How pointless and imaginary the distinctions between children of rape and children who are conceived consensually actually are. So as we can see, abortion, even for rape, is not the answer, because we are murdering innocent people. Abortion is also bad for the rape victim, and this is something that's often overlooked. Abortion is awful for rape victims, and the reason is because they already have survivor's trauma. But now, in addition to that, they're going to have to live with the knowledge that they murdered an innocent baby. So their trauma is going to be increased, not decreased. They were already probably traumatized from going through such a thing and surviving. But if they commit a murder on top of that, and they have to live with not only the trauma of being raped, but the guilt of having murdered a baby, then you're just adding to the amount of trauma that they're going to have to live with. You're not making anything better. You're just adding to the amount of guilt and trauma that they're going to have to carry around for the rest of their life. And that's the thing. You can't undo the damage caused by evil by performing another act of great evil. When it comes to rape, everyone wants a quick, easy answer, but sometimes such a solution does not exist. Look at it this way. You can't end evil with more evil. It's like trying to put out a forest fire by pouring jet fuel on it. You're just going to make it worse. There is only one thing that can end the cycle of evil, and that is an act of love, mercy, justice, or compassion. I'll tell you a story that very few people know. After World War II, when the Germans lost, many powerful people were outraged at what they had done, and some people even suggested that they should take revenge on the Germans for their crimes against humanity. And the people who wanted this suggested that they should do it by doing to them what they had done to others. It was suggested that the Allies should exterminate the German people in an act of revenge for the crimes they had committed and the lives they had destroyed. And on the surface, this actually makes a lot of sense. The Germans planned to exterminate the Jewish people, as well as various other races, such as South Asians, which I belong to. And now the tables had turned on the Germans. It was time for them to become the ones who were going to get exterminated. On the surface, that makes total sense. An eye for an eye. However, fortunately, people said no. They rejected the plan, and they allowed the German people to survive. And the reason they rejected the plan to exterminate the German people was because they knew that you cannot end evil by committing more acts of evil. They knew that to end the cycle of violence, revenge, and evil, it would take an act of mercy, an act of love, and an act of compassion. And so, despite the fact the Germans deserved no mercy, no love, and no compassion, the Allies decided to show them mercy and compassion, and to not exterminate them. By showing the Germans mercy when they deserved none, and by sparing their lives when they had taken the lives of so many innocent people, the Allies sent out an astonishing message of mercy. They set a powerful example that has lasted through the ages, and that example is something we can all learn from. Even today, we can learn from it. Their message was that only love can defeat hate, and only an act of mercy can end the cycle of evil and vengeance. So as we can see from the Allies, trying to end evil by committing more acts of evil does not work. The Allied cities of London, Paris and Rome had been burnt to the ground, and the Allies were going to have to rebuild the world from the ground up. And they knew that how they treated the Germans was going to set the example for this new world. It was going to set the precedent for how people would treat each other. And thankfully, they had the wisdom to see that exterminating the German people would just show the world that they had learned nothing. And it would set an example for the world that the way to defeat hate is with more hatred, and the way to defeat evil is with more evil. But that is not the world they wanted to rebuild. So instead, they showed the Germans undeserved mercy, and in that act of true mercy, they ended a cycle of vengeance and hatred that had been going on since World War I. That cycle of evil was finally ended through an act of undeserved mercy, love and compassion. You cannot end the cycle of evil with another act of evil, because that will just make things worse. Only an act of love, mercy, justice or compassion can end the cycle of evil. Obviously this example does not translate very well into the abortion debate, because the Germans actually committed a horrendous crime. But in the example of a woman who is raped and who chooses to get an abortion, the baby that she is murdering has done nothing wrong. The baby is totally innocent. It is the father who has committed the awful act, and yet the woman is punishing an innocent baby. So the German war example I just used is not a true comparison. To make it a true comparison, it would be like if the Germans were defeated after the war, and in vengeance, the British murdered all of their babies. That would be a true comparison with abortion, as the Germans would be the father who committed the evil act, and the German babies would be the innocent fetus who was punished for his evil acts. So while the example is not perfect, I think you can understand what I'm trying to say. My point is that evil cannot be defeated by an act of evil. Evil cannot be ended by an act of evil. Trying to defeat evil with more evil is like getting stabbed by a dagger and then trying to heal the damage by grabbing the dagger and driving it further into the wound. Or it's like being in the Antarctic and trying to escape hypothermia by diving into a freezing icy lake, or trying to illuminate a room by extinguishing every source of light. You're just going to make things worse. Evil cannot be defeated by more evil. Evil can only be defeated by acts of love, mercy, justice, and compassion. That is the only way to end the cycle of evil. So that is why, even in the instance of rape, we mustn't choose evil. We mustn't murder babies for abortion. So what about if the health of the mother is in danger? If a mother's health is in danger? Well, first of all, I would like to start off by pointing out that this issue is often misrepresented. Pro-choicers present it as though you have two options. Either you can get the abortion or you die. Those are your only two options. It's black and white, there's nothing else. Get the abortion or die. Pro-choicers often like to represent it like that. They often like to make you think it's like that. That is often how they argue this kind of stuff. But in real life, it's often rarely black and white. As with many medical issues, there are normally multiple options that could be pursued. It's not just a simple straight choice between get the abortion or die. There's normally multiple medical options. But pro-choicers want to portray it as though it's literally just get the abortion or die. But obviously that isn't actually true. In real life, there's normally multiple medical options. I would also like to point out that pregnancy isn't a disease. There is no disease that can be cured by abortion. So abortion isn't a cure to any disease. So once again, this notion that you need an abortion or you'll die is not true. An abortion is not a cure to any disease. So I just want to put that out there as a preface. before I get into the actual argument. I'm just saying that you don't have to choose between abortion and living. There are normally other medical options available. So should women whose health is at risk because of pregnancy get an abortion so their health will no longer be in danger? Is that something that should be done? And once again, to answer this, we have to get right back to the main question. The big question that is the most important, we have to get right back to it. And that question is, as always, are fetuses, babies in the womb, alive and human? And as I said at the beginning of this episode, the answers to both of those questions is yes. Once again, babies in the womb are growing, they're taking in nutrients and they're growing, and they're using it as energy to grow, so they are alive, they're living organisms. A biological organism that experiences growth is alive. They have human DNA, they got it from their parents, they have half of their father's DNA, they have half of their mother's DNA, and from the moment of conception it forms into a totally unique, distinct DNA code, separate from the mother's and the father's. This DNA code, even from the moment of conception, contains their genetic information, from their hair colour to their eye colour to their skin colour. All of that is already present, and the DNA code will stay the exact same from the moment of conception until they die as an adult. It stays the exact same. So clearly, the answer is unborn babies are alive and human. We have shown that beyond any shadow of a doubt. And since we know that they're alive and human, we can now answer the question, should a woman whose health is endangered by pregnancy get an abortion so her health will no longer be in danger? The answer is no, because that would mean murdering an innocent child. You're essentially asking, if a woman's health is in danger and she can resolve that by murdering an innocent child, should she do that? The answer is obviously no. It's not even a question. The answer is obviously no. You shouldn't murder an innocent person, even if it increases your chances of survival. Because murder is wrong. Think about it this way. Imagine if I had a child and I was living in Alaska and it was winter time and there was a blizzard and we only had a certain amount of food and we were stuck in a cabin and we couldn't leave. And my child was my daughter and she was with me in the cabin and we're both stuck inside and it's snowing so hard we can't leave. And after a while we start running low on food. And I say to myself, there might not be enough food for me and my daughter. So to ensure that I survive, I'm going to have to push my daughter outside and lock the door, even though she will die. So I go and I pick up my daughter and I open the door and I throw her out into the cold and let the blizzard consume her. Would you say that I have done something wrong? And I really hope you answered yes. You have done something wrong. In fact, what you did was extremely evil. And yes, indeed, me choosing to murder my daughter because it will increase my chances of survival is completely evil. Just because I want to survive, it doesn't give me the right to murder my daughter. It doesn't give me the right to murder any innocent person, in fact. Whether they were my daughter or not, even if they were unrelated to me, it would still be wrong for me to throw them out into the freezing cold and let them die. And imagine this. I'll give you another scenario. Imagine I have a daughter and we're in the jungle and me and my daughter are running from a tribe of cannibals. The cannibals are after us. They want to eat us alive and me and my daughter are running from them. Anyway, we eventually find a tree and we hide in the tree. And the cannibals are beneath the tree, but they can't see us. They don't know where we are. And I think to myself, hey, wait a minute. If I kick my daughter off the tree and throw her to the cannibals, it will probably create a distraction and allow me to escape. So I tell my daughter to come over. And I kick her off the tree and she falls down and breaks her legs. And the cannibals jump on her and start biting into her, cutting her up and eating her alive. Would you say I've done something wrong? Would you say my actions were unjust? And I really, really hope that you said yes. I really hope that you said, Shadow Critic, your actions were morally indefensible. Your actions were evil. And yes, that is exactly correct. Me throwing my daughter to cannibals so that I would have an increased chance of survival is evil. Just because I want to survive, it doesn't mean I have the right to throw my daughter to cannibals so they can eat her alive. Such an act is evil and wrong. And it doesn't even matter if she's my daughter or not. Even if she wasn't related to me at all, even if we didn't share any blood whatsoever, and we weren't relatives of any kind, it would still be wrong for me to throw her to cannibals to get eaten alive. It would still be murder, it would still be evil, and it would still be wrong. So if that's true of a stranger, then it must be true of your own daughter. So yes, as we can see, murdering people so that you can have an increased chance of survival is wrong. And you don't want to do that, because murdering people so that you can survive is not something you want to live with. That's not something you want on your conscience as you go to sleep at night. It's just not something you want in your life. It's not something you want to live with. The knowledge that you murdered an innocent child so that you would have an increased chance of survival. That's just not knowledge that you want. Now, it is possible that a woman might die of health complications due to pregnancy, and that is very tragic, but someone once said, in death we know who we truly are. In death we know what kind of person we've become. And if you're the kind of person who's willing to murder other people so they can survive, then you avoided death, but at what cost? Once again, murdering people so that you can survive is not acceptable. It is not moral. Just like it would be immoral for me to throw my daughter out into a blizzard so that I could have increased food supplies and therefore an increased chance of survival, or throwing my daughter to cannibals so they would eat her instead of me and I could escape, just as that is cowardly and evil, it's also cowardly and evil to just murder your child for abortion so that you can have an increased chance of survival. The prospect of death is scary, but we all have to face it in our lives, and we can't let it make us into monsters. We can't let our fear of death turn us into monsters. Because as I said, if we do things like throw people into blizzards so we can have more food and a better chance of survival, or throw people to cannibals so they can create a distraction and we can sneak away and get a better chance of survival. If we do that kind of stuff, yes, our chances of survival may have gone up, but at too high a cost. Like I said, we can't let our fear of death turn us into monsters. And so, as we can see in my examples of me and my daughter in a cabin trying to survive the winter, and me throwing her out into an Antarctic blizzard so I can get a better chance of survival for myself, and me being in a tree with my daughter hiding from cannibals and kicking her out of the tree so she'll fall and create a distraction for the cannibals so I can sneak away and get a better chance of survival. Just as those two examples are extremely immoral and evil, it's also immoral and evil to use abortion and murder your child so you can have a better chance of surviving a health complication. There are better ways of trying to survive, like exploring your medical options. And although death is a possibility, at least you won't be a murderer. Finally, pro-choicers love to create extreme hypothetical examples. For instance, here's an example they might give. They might say, what if a woman is raped and she got pregnant as a result and her life is in danger because of the pregnancy? Now, I should point out, the likelihood of something like that actually happening is extremely low. Most abortions are from consensual sex. And when I say most, I mean like almost all of them. And this is something Planned Parenthood admits. Their data is available online, and you can look for yourself. The vast majority of abortions is due to consensual sex, not rape, and it's not even remotely close. Almost all abortions are from consensual sex, not rape. In addition to that, women rarely die in pregnancy anymore. Actually, historically speaking, the entire idea that women used to die in pregnancy and childbirth all of the time is something of a rumour. It did happen, but not to the extent you might think. We have the impression that it happened non-stop, and while it did happen, it wasn't to the extent you might think. Nonetheless, in the modern era, women rarely die in pregnancy and childbirth anymore. It almost never happens in the modern era. In the modern era, it's very unlikely a woman will die in pregnancy or childbirth. So these extreme hypothetical examples pro-choicers love to use so much are just a cheap scare tactic. However, I suppose that such a situation, although very unlikely, is still technically possible, and so I will give you an answer. Let's say you do have an example in which a woman was raped and she got pregnant as a result, and the pregnancy was a risk to her life. Does she have the right to get an abortion in that particular situation? Well, the answer is no. And the reason is because of everything I have said throughout this entire episode. Everything I have said throughout this episode still stands. We still have to ask the following questions. Firstly, is the child alive? And secondly, is the child human? As I have shown earlier throughout this episode, babies in the womb are both alive and fully human, so murdering them is always wrong. No amount of scaring people with extreme hypothetical examples will ever justify the murder of an innocent person. Murder is always wrong, no matter what kind of hypothetical scare tactic situation you come up with. Murder is always wrong. To give you a quick example, why that is still true no matter what. Imagine if two people were in a cabin. One of them was an adult, but the other was a child, conceived through rape. The cabin is running out of food. There might not be enough for both of them to survive. They are in the middle of a blizzard. They're in the Antarctic. It's freezing cold outside. If they go outside, the blizzard will kill them. Now the adult figures out that if they throw the child out, it will increase their chances of survival. And they justify it with the logic that the child came from rape, so nobody would care. They say because the child was conceived through rape. It really doesn't matter whether the child lives or dies, because nobody will care anyway. At least in their opinion. That's okay. Would you say that's moral or ethical? And the answer is, obviously not. No, that's evil. Even if the child was conceived through rape, that doesn't give you the right to throw it out of the cabin into the blizzard and to let it die. To give another example, what if an adult and a child were running away from a tribe of cannibals who wanted to eat them alive, and they hid in a tree? Now, while hiding in the tree, the adult realizes that the child was conceived through rape. So the child was conceived through rape. And the adult thinks to themselves, you know, since this child was conceived through rape, I think it's okay for me to throw her to the cannibals. And while they're eating her, I'll use her as a distraction to get away. And it's okay because she was conceived through rape. So does anyone really care? Now what would you say about that particular situation, that person and their logic? I hope you would see that what they did was evil, what they did was wrong. Just because in this situation the child was conceived through rape, it doesn't give you the right to throw them to the cannibals and let the cannibals eat them and use them as a distraction to get away. It's still wrong. It's still evil. So as we can see, even if a child is conceived through rape and there are health complications with the pregnancy that endanger the life of the mother, it does not give us the right to murder the child. Why is that? It's because murder is always wrong. We must live in constant pursuit of justice, and murder is not just. Murder is always wrong. Just because we fear death, it doesn't give us the right to murder innocent people. Murder is wrong. Look, everyone is afraid of death, including me, but we cannot allow our fear of death to turn us into monsters. Murder is always wrong. No exceptions. It doesn't matter what hypothetical scare tactic examples you come up with. Murder is always wrong. No exceptions. Instead, I would encourage anyone who has health complications in pregnancy to explore their medical options, because there are other choices than murder. Don't let pro-choices and Planned Parenthood trick you into murdering someone and making a choice you'll regret forever. Finally, remember, no matter what the situation, we must try to live with justice, and murder is always wrong. Okay, so thanks for listening to all that. I know that was really intense. I know that was a really intense subject with rape, death and abortion being talked about. But I felt that it was necessary to make this episode. So thanks for listening. I'm the Shadow Critic.
could keep the promise I made to Sakura.
The victor has been decided.
Thanks. I got this strong because you were all there for me.